This podcast includes discussion of rape and sexual assault, abuse, murder, and other criminal behavior. Listener discretion is advised. Greg Roberts saw his mother everywhere. He would spot cars on the highway that looked like Joyce's Oldsmobile.
Big white Delta 88, huge car.
And catch himself doing double takes at stoplights, hoping to see her behind the wheel. The conversations he had had with his mom after her rape replayed over and over in his mind. He agonized about what she hadn't told him.
I talked to her real regularly, but in the meantime, I was at school and she didn't want to affect my schooling and grades and things that were going on, so.
A single thought haunted Greg. He had not been there to protect her. He didn't share this pain with anyone, save perhaps his sister and father.
He holds a lot of it inside of him.
Mel Roberts told me Greg bore this burden, the sense of guilt, in private.
The only time we'll ever talk about it is if we're just together alone. We don't talk about it much when other people are around.
Greg had finished dental school and at the end of 1990 wrapped up his residency with the Georgetown University Medical Service in Washington, D.C. He had achieved his childhood dream and become not just a dentist, but an oral surgeon. The person who would have been most proud of him, who would have celebrated his achievement more than anyone, was not there. Nearly 6 years had passed since Greg had first faced the question of whether or not to drop out of school and move home to help search for Joyce. Mel had urged him to hold fast.
I still think it was the right decision. There wasn't a thing he could do by being there.
Now, at the start of 1991, Greg confronted a new choice: where to go next. Mel had settled down in Texas, and he seemed likely to stay there. Kim and Aunt Dorothy were both in Utah. And Joyce was, well, Greg didn't know. Much of what he then knew about his mother's disappearance had come to him secondhand. This was, after all, the age before Google. If you even had internet access at home, you paid for it by the minute, and it tied up your phone line. For years, Kim had cut articles about her mom out of the local newspapers and mailed them across the country to Greg. She had promised to keep him informed of every development. This tether kept tugging Greg back toward South Ogden, toward where he had last seen his mom in the summer of 1984, waving goodbye as he had pulled away from her in his overloaded Honda Accord. The time had come for Greg to return home. This is Cold, Season 2, Episode 7, Shameless. From KSL Podcasts, I'm Dave Cawley. Back after this quick break. Colleen Bartell struggled to get through to Doug Lovell. She had been working as a licensed clinical social worker at the Utah State Prison since 1979, the same year Doug had arrived there on an armed robbery conviction. But they hadn't met until 1989, when Colleen was assigned to manage the Merit 2 program at the prison's Special Service Dormitory, or SSD. That's where Doug was living. Many of the inmates enrolled in the Merit 2 program were there to work through mild cognitive or behavioral issues, and they demanded much of Colleen's time. As a result, she didn't interact with Doug much at first. She hadn't been the one to admit Doug to the program either, but knew from his file the ostensible purpose for his presence was treatment for depression. She noted he seemed guarded. That began to change about 6 months into Colleen's assignment at SSD, round about the time Doug's wife Rhonda filed for divorce. Little by little, he started to talk. Colleen figured it had just taken time for Doug to suss out if he could trust her. Doug told Colleen he'd been wrongly accused and convicted. He said he hadn't raped Joyce Yost. Colleen focused her efforts on helping Doug address this denial. She wanted him to understand his minimizations of his own actions were impediments to his progress in therapy. She continued to observe Doug as the weeks and months went on. She noted he was high-functioning and stable, something she couldn't say for all of the inmates at SSD. He was not violent. In fact, he often mediated disputes between prison staff and other inmates. Perhaps the best example of this came in August of '91, when Jeff Pratt, the lead corrections officer at SSD, had a dangerous accident. Jeff placed a letter about it in Doug's jacket or file. Here's what it said.
Letter of appreciation for Doug Lovell, inmate number 14679. On August 11, 1991, at approximately 17:12 hours in the supply room at SSD, a defective can of insecticide sprayed on me in the face and eyes, causing a burning sensation. At that point, I was blinded and not sure of the direction out. Lovell grabbed my arm and led me to the bathroom, speaking precise directions in a calm voice to get me there quickly. Once in the bathroom, Lovell got the water going and helped me flush my face and eyes. Credit Lovell for preventing any serious harm or injury to me.
Colleen transferred out of SSD about that same time. She took over another program doing group-oriented substance abuse counseling. Doug applied to join. This was interesting considering Doug claimed not to be using at the time. In fact, he said he'd been off pills since first arriving at the prison in 1986. But now he wanted Colleen's help in figuring out why he had become addicted in the first place. It was either progress or a ruse. Colleen denied Doug's application for group drug abuse counseling, not because she didn't think he was being honest, but because she didn't have room. Yet. South Ogden Police Sergeant Terry Carpenter had spent the summer of '91 working to verify information he'd received from Doug Lovell's ex-wife Rhonda. He also spent a lot of time transcribing, by hand, the audio recording from the wire Rhonda had worn into the Utah State Prison.
And I know the quality of the tape that first time around
was horrible.
Pretty rough.
But I laid on the floor of my living room with my stereo and would push backwards and forward and play them. And my poor little wife would help me try to understand what they were saying.
A copy of that tape would later go through enhancement at FBI headquarters, but it didn't help much. Still, Terry was able to make out enough. He had heard Doug mention Tom Peters and Billy Jack, the two men Doug had hired to kill Joyce. Terry had already talked to Tom once at the Utah State Prison, but dropped by to see him again on September 5th, 1991.
Okay, we're recording this now, so.
And this time, he put their conversation on tape.
How you doing? Oh, pretty good. How are you? I'm doing all right. You're doing all right.
Listen close, because this audio comes from an old cassette, and Tom's voice isn't always clear.
Get any flack over our last visit? A little. There was some concern. Is that right? Yeah. He talked to you about it? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I talked to him. Actually.
Tom told Terry that on the day of his last visit to the prison, Doug had confronted Tom and asked what he had told the detective.
Well, at first he said, he said, man, I didn't know how you can do this to me. I said, I ain't done nothing to you. I said, really, Doug, I don't know nothing. He said, what you did.
Tom had insisted to Doug he hadn't said anything. Doug hadn't been convinced because Terry Carpenter had known about his having paid people to have Joyce killed. In this next clip, Tom tells Terry that Doug had told him, "When he started telling me these things, I knew it had to be you."
Well, he said, man, he said, when he started telling me these things, I knew it had to be you because you was the only one I knew. And he said, but then he told me about some guns.
Terry had told Doug he knew about the stolen guns. But Doug had never told Tom about the guns, which he had swiped with someone else.
He never mentions this other guy's name.
No, he never mentions nobody's name.
If you heard it, would you remember it?
Maybe. If I heard his name, yeah, I mean, I'd probably know a name if I heard it.
What I've understood is that it was Billy Jack.
Yeah, that's what he said. That's what he said. Yeah. Yeah, he did mention it. That's right. He did say Billy Jack. No, I said, I don't even know Billy Jack.
Okay, now.
This discrepancy had caused Doug a little bit of doubt, giving Tom cover. Tom said Doug had also asked him during their talk if he had ever visited his father's cabin.
I think he asked him 3 or 4 times, you remember my dad's property? You remember my dad's property?
Tom told Terry he had never been up to the Lovell family cabin, but speculated maybe that's where Doug had buried Joyce.
Could it be up there? I don't know. I swear to God, that's good speculation. I mean, I've been places with him. I mean, to waterfalls, but God, I don't know if I can even remember. But I know he hunts. He's an avid guy. He loves to hunt, and he's been all over the mountains. Yeah.
Terry again told Tom he needed his help. Joyce deserved justice. Tom agreed and described what he had felt when he had first learned Joyce was missing.
But I remember when we found out about her, and I remember the flash that come across me very like a band on my chest, because he'd already raped her once. And then to go again, and then there he is, and now he's going to kill her, So that poor woman, her nightmare, a nightmare on top of a nightmare.
A nightmare on top of a nightmare. Tom said he was willing to help. In exchange, he wanted Terry to pull strings and get him assigned to an inmate firefighting crew. That way, Tom could serve out the rest of his sentence outside the prison fences. Life inside had grown uncomfortable. Tom said Doug had once come up behind him in the chow hall and kissed him on the top of the head.
I know it gives me chills when he puts his hand on me from behind and kisses me on top of my forehead. That does not feel good.
Tom called it the kiss of death. Greg Roberts' return to South Ogden allowed him to take care of some unresolved business. He went to court at the end of September 1991 and asked to have his mother declared deceased. Greg had heard from a life insurance agent in the months after his mom's disappearance. She had had a $10,000 policy and had listed Greg as the beneficiary. The company wouldn't pay out, though, while her status remained unresolved. The judge's order declaring Joyce deceased changed that. The insurance company wrote a check for $13,000, with the extra money being interest that had accrued on the principal. Greg would have given up every single penny of it to have his mother back.
It just changed a lot of things.
And nothing's ever been the same.
Kim, Greg, and those closest to their family held a funeral. They gathered at Washington Heights Memorial Park Cemetery and placed a headstone for Joyce. The ritual helped draw them together in their ongoing grief.
She didn't have a negative bone in her body. She was never cross. She was never foul or nasty. She was happy. She was beautiful. She was the whole package. She was just wrapped up with the most beautiful bow.
They shared memories, regaling Kim's growing kids with stories of their grandmother.
And my oldest daughter's really the only one that has any real memories of her, because the other two were younger.
But after it was over, Kim's husband Randy said it felt somehow hollow. They all knew their trauma was open-ended.
I remember telling Kim, like on Memorial Day and Mother's Day, "You want to go take some flowers over to your mom?" "My mom ain't there," she says. "That's just a rock." She said, "My mom's not there." I said, "But it's a place, you know." And she said, "No," she says, "Man, I want to go where my mom is."
Kim believed Doug Lovell knew right where her mom was. But prosecutors had still not charged him with Joyce's murder.
He had 2 15-year-to-life sentences that both had a minimum mandatory, so they knew he wasn't going anywhere.
She didn't know Doug had a plan to beat that sentence and win his freedom. While Greg was going to court in September of 1991, so was Doug's appellate attorney Robert Archuleta. He filed a motion asking a judge's permission to review the confidential pre-sentence report a probation officer had prepared on Doug after his conviction in the rape case. Doug intended to challenge the legality of his 15-to-life sentence by arguing the pre-sentence report had included unsubstantiated claims he had killed Joyce Yost. Judge Rodney Page held a hearing on Archuleta's motion and at the start of October granted permission for the attorney to review the pre-sentence report. A short time later, Archuleta withdrew as Doug's attorney. Now, I can't say for sure because Archuleta is deceased, but it's possible what he saw in the pre-sentence report made him reevaluate his decision to represent Doug. In Archuleta's absence, Doug turned to one of his coworkers at the prison's sign shop for legal advice. His name was William Babel.
I'm one of the head inmate litigators in this place. I'm suing the department every other day.
William had discussed Doug's case with him at length, even before Archuleta's withdrawal. He had been helping Doug draft what's known as a writ of habeas corpus. For that purpose, Doug had provided William with transcripts from the rape trial.
When I first started looking at his legal stuff, he said that, it was a consensual thing. I said, "But I've read your transcripts. So I'm not stupid. I can see right through this. You might try that dodge with these guys, but you're going to have to come clean."
William said Doug did come clean, at least as far as the rape was concerned. He admitted he had kidnapped Joyce and sexually assaulted her. He was guilty of that. On December 18th, 1991, Doug had come to work at the prison sign shop with a new legal request for William. He wanted to know if it was possible to force South Ogden police to give back the pictures they had taken from Rhonda's apartment the prior June.
And I asked him, "Well, who's the cop that's got the pictures?" And he said, "Carpenter." He says, "That same one that come and talk to you?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, I can't remember exactly what it was we were talking about that led up to that." But I says, "Can he stick you with this?" And he said, "There's no way." He says, "When she disappeared from the O Club, or when she left the O Club, and then when she disappeared, I was surrounded by 8 witnesses. You can never stick this on."
William had heard enough. The following day, he phoned South Ogden police and asked to speak with Terry Carpenter. Terry didn't know William, but he headed down to the prison and sat down with him for this candid conversation which you've been hearing.
How did you know to call me?
Because him using your name. Carpenter. Son of a bitch is bothering my wife again.
William did not much care for Doug.
The inmate's inmate. But this guy's dirty as hell. And anything that he says that I think you can use, you're going to get.
Okay.
Because he's slime.
Strong words coming from a guy like William Babel. William was serving time for a crime that bore startling similarity to Doug's. Unlike Doug, William never made good on the threat to kill the woman he had abducted and raped.
I'm here on an ugly crime myself. It's not anything like this. And it's, I've done my little stipend for the state. I've got myself straight and got away from all the dope. And I really regret the things I did. But I talked to this guy, and just watching him. He's fun stuff.
William did not ask Terry for any favors, as Tom Peters had. He didn't want a kind word to the parole board or a transfer to a different facility. He just wanted Doug out of the way.
Yeah, he has no conscience, has no remorse, he has no moral value. This guy's morally bankrupt. He's swine. He just is, and I've read the transcripts and I've read his testimony and heard all his and I'm absolutely convinced that he either arranged her murder or did it himself.
William was living in SSD, undergoing sex offender treatment. He believed Doug didn't belong in SSD. He said Doug should instead be housed in the prison's Uinta facility, maximum security, a place for killers.
And, anything I can do to help you send him across the lawn to Uinta too, let him sit over there and rot, I'll do it.
Terry asked William about his conversations with Doug. Had Doug ever described how Joyce had died? No. Had he ever disclosed where Joyce's body was? No. But William said Doug had possibly dropped clues.
There's something that sounds like her name that he'd told Holthouse.
Thing that sounds like her name.
Or, yeah, a place where he'd gone hunting that has the same sound as Joyce Yost's name.
There's a prominent place where people hunt deer that's called Yost, Utah.
Yeah.
Yost is a ghost town in the far northwestern corner of Utah, near the Idaho and Nevada borders. It's near a mountain range called the Raft River Mountains, a popular spot for deer hunting. Doug had told Detective Bill Holthouse he remembered Joyce's last name because it was the same as the town of Yost. Bill had testified to that during the 1985 trial. William Babel had done his homework. Perhaps the most interesting story William had to share, though, involved an encounter he said he had had with Doug the prior May.
He said that somebody come out here and talk to him about this Joyce Yost coming up missing. And he was concerned that he was going to be questioned on the Cherie Warren's disappearance too.
Terry perked up at the mention of Cherie Warren, the missing woman from Roy, Utah, who had disappeared just a short time after Joyce and whose car had turned up in Las Vegas. Terry had a hunch Doug Lovell might have had a hand in Cherie Warren's disappearance, though he couldn't prove it.
And other than that
Is he involved in that, Bill?
I think he is. I think he knows about it. And he says, well, they'll never stick me with that because Carrie Hartman's the one that's going to end up eating that one.
I've mentioned Carrie Hartman before. He was Cherie Warren's boyfriend at the time of her disappearance in October of '85. But by this point in '91, Hartman was in prison for a series of rapes he had committed.
Hartman's conviction carries a maximum prison term of from 15 years to life. He also faces trial on 3 other rape charges.
Carrie had not been charged and convicted on the rape until 1987, more than a year after Doug went away for assaulting Joyce.
Why does he know so much about Cherie Warren?
I don't know. And that really struck me hard because I knew I was in a therapy group with Carrie Hartman.
William said he had heard Carrie's side of the story while they were both in that sex offender therapy group in SSD. Carrie had since been moved to a far-flung county jail, and as far as William knew, Doug and Carrie never crossed paths. William suggested if Terry wanted to get Doug talking, he should have Joyce and Cherie's names mentioned together on the news.
Even if you could get somebody to dummy up some stories somewhere in print, investigation on Cherie Warren's pop list, stick in the Tribune, have somebody stick in the Tribune, where he's going to see it.
Does he go over the paper real quick?
Every day, we get the paper in our shop every day.
William said there were recorders on the phones at the prison. If police claimed to have found a woman's body in the mountains near Ogden, Doug would probably call out and have someone go check and see if Joyce was still where he had left her.
They tie me a little bit as far as legalities of deliberately purporting something that we know not to be accurate. And so I have I have problems with that. I don't know whether you could slide something there or not. I don't know.
Terry confided in William. He was ready to serve Doug with capital homicide charges any day now. Prosecutors had given him the green light. William said now was the time. Anything police had on Doug, they should use as soon as possible.
Something you might want to do is when you rock this guy, is request the corrections, because it's a capital case and you don't want him talking to anybody, is sequester him and Max and monitor his phone calls, monitor his mail, monitor everybody he talks to. See, they put him in Max so he can't talk to anybody.
Terry made note of the suggestion, thanked William for his time, and went on his way. A quick note before returning to the story. The back half of this episode includes some very rough sections of tape, stuff that normally wouldn't make the cut because of how difficult to understand it is. But it's critical information and needs to stay in. I'll be restating the most important parts, but you can also follow along with text using the full episode transcript available at thecoldpodcast.com. A series of news articles about the Joyce Yost case appeared in Utah newspapers on Friday, January 17, 1992. Stories also played on TV and radio, stating police were, quote, reopening their investigation into Joyce's disappearance. The Associated Press quoted Terry Carpenter as saying, "We have some new leads in the case, but it isn't appropriate for me to discuss them." Joyce's son, Greg Roberts, figured Terry was working an angle.
He's always playing mind games with Doug Lovell. I think he's been good at it.
The following day, Terry met with Rhonda Butters on the outskirts of the Utah State Prison. She had agreed to once again wear a wire inside the fences. Terry had a couple of reasons for wanting a second go-round. Most important was getting Doug to disclose the location of Joyce's body, something he had not done during the first wire recording the prior June. Rhonda intended to ask questions more specific to that point this time. Audio quality was the second reason. The audio from the first wire recording had bordered on unintelligible, as you heard in the last episode. Playing that garbled recording for a jury was not likely to have the hoped-for impact. In the months since the first wire recording, Terry had managed to scrounge up a better piece of equipment. A former colleague of his by the name of Glenn Passy worked as a special agent for the U.S. Secret Service. Glenn had access to legit spy gear, including a little recorder from a Swiss company called Nagra. The Nagra unit was the Swiss watch of field audio recorders. Tiny and precise.
This is Rhonda Butters, Glenn Passy, and Terry Carpenter. We're all just preparing to enter the Utah State Prison. We're currently at the Academy, which is the east prison across the freeway.
The Nagra tape wasn't exactly hi-fi, but it was an improvement.
Rhonda's going to drive over, and we're going to follow her in. See you in a minute. Bye.
Rhonda hadn't been out to visit Doug in months. As she prepared to drive over, Elton John and Boy George wailed their duet of "Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me" over the car stereo. The jokes and nervous laughter, as well as the music, ended when Rhonda reached the prison gate. She parked and went inside, her heel clicks echoing through the austere corridors. Familiar ground. Rhonda knew where to go. She headed into the crowded visiting area and waited for the staff to bring her ex-husband out to meet her.
Hi. Hi. How you doing? How you doing? Address? Yeah. What's up with that? Can I wear a dress? Yeah, I like them.
They moved to a table and sat down. Rhonda said she felt nervous because it had been a while. Doug laughed. He wasn't nervous at all. They swapped some small talk, bantering about Doug's weight. He had dropped from nearly 200 muscular pounds down to about 175 on a diet of rice and tuna. Rhonda said eating was her favorite hobby, or maybe sleeping. Doug said his was sex. At one point, he complimented the way her legs looked in her dress.
Boy, I always loved your thighs. Long waist, meat.
If you couldn't make that out, he said, "I always loved your thighs. Long legs, but with meat." Doug also brought up another of his favorite hobbies, watching country music on TV.
And by the way, Garth Brooks last night was bitching.
The prior evening, NBC had broadcast an hour-long special called This is Garth Brooks.
He interviewed his wife, Sandy, last night. She said he had long hair, beard, and when he sings, he's not a stander. He runs around, he and this other guy broke a guitar, and he jumped off in the audience. He was like, God, man, he's crazy. He jumped off.
What had most caught Doug's attention, though, was the country artist's performance of a single song.
God, he sang that song, Shameless.
Garth Brooks' cover of the Billy Joel song Shameless had appeared on his third studio album. It had become a chart-topping hit at the end of 1991. The song included a stanza that goes like this: "I'm shameless, shameless as a man can be. You could make a total fool of me. I just wanted you to know that I am shameless."
So anyway,
Doug turned to the topic of the newspaper article, the one stating South Ogden police were reopening the Joyce Yost case. He asked Rhonda if she had seen it. She said she had. Doug said he thought her phone was bugged.
And I think that they surfaced this story out, hoping that I would get on the phone and say, something that might make it criminal. Yeah, I do. I don't think there is no person.
By no person, Doug meant police couldn't have any source for information about what had actually happened to Joyce other than himself.
They say they have possibly somebody that can lead them to the body, to the remains, which, first off, they don't even know if she's even deceased, the paper down here.
He speculated the only reason police were chattering to the media about Joyce now was his writ of habeas corpus.
I feel really good about my writ.
Rhonda questioned just how Doug was managing to afford all the legal fees. He said the writ wasn't going to cost him a dime. He had fired his attorneys and was working with an inmate who knew the law.
I fired both Cook and Arson that afternoon.
Hard out.
And I went with this inmate. He really knows the law. William Babel.
Ah, William Babel, the inmate litigator who worked with Doug at the prison sign shop. Doug felt confident in his ability to go pro se, or to represent himself. He had done it before.
It's like, you know that thing up there, that bullshit thing? Nobody could have represented us better than me, because I knew what had to be said. And I'm telling you, I'm this close to saying, I don't want an attorney, I'll do this myself. Because he is going to be saying what
If Doug decided he did need an attorney, he said he would just use appointed counsel. And even then, he would call the shots.
This is another thing about my attorneys. When they give me an attorney, he is going to speak for me. I'm not going to listen to no more, I don't want to do this, or we're not going to do this. I'll stand up and I'll fire him. I'll say, Your Honor, he's not doing what I want him to do, and he does not have my special interests in mind. Therefore, I want to terminate him. And we'll start this all over. Because John, Roy, if I would have been mentally together.
By John, he meant John Hutchison, the attorney who had defended him in the rape case. Hutchison's actions, or lack thereof, during the 1985 trial were what Doug's writ was all about. He contended Hutchison had made several errors that had prejudiced the jury. They included failing to object to the testimony of Sharon Guess, the woman Doug had gone to the Pier 3 to see on the night he first encountered Joyce.
Didn't address this. Remember that Sharon Guess gal that got up and testified that she was being stalked around or something by a little red carpet? That was highly, that was a reversible error by itself right there. Did you ever follow the Kennedy?
When Doug's writ went before a judge, he said he wanted Rhonda to testify for him. She would say she had been driving his car, the red Mazda, and not him.
You had my Mazda RX-7 for a while, but I don't think during the time that Sharon said that she was being followed.
I can't remember all that.
I know. Well, I'll go over all that with you, but I'm just preparing you now for what's coming up months down the road.
Doug wanted Rhonda to lie for him under oath. The point of this was to undermine what Sharon Guess had testified to and suggest John Hutchison should have pursued this line of attack during the trial.
Sharon Guess testifying, saying that she was stalked around by somebody that she didn't even say she could identify. All she said was it's a little red car with flip-up lights. Well, now, how controversial is that? I drive a little red car with flip-up lights, and she didn't say. So, that tainted the jury. I mean, that really tainted the jury a lot. And it could have been a reversible error. In fact, the Supreme Court.
But because Hutchison hadn't objected during the trial, the Utah Supreme Court had refused to even consider this issue on appeal. Doug hoped to get the court to address it with his writ. Doug went on a little tangent here, bringing up his 1978 trial for the armed robbery at the U-Save market.
Do you remember when Sherwin Hooker and I did that robbery?
Yeah.
Do you remember that gal that got him testified that she identified me?
Oh, yeah.
He was talking about Kelly, the 18-year-old U-Save market clerk who had bumped into Doug behind the store that night while the robbery was taking place. Remember, she had told police she had startled a man after spotting him ducked down by the rear bumper of what turned out to be the getaway car. Kelly told me, and police records reflect, she had reported exchanging words with Doug.
I said hello, and so did he, because I startled him and he startled me.
Kelly had testified to that at Doug's robbery trial in '78, helping secure his conviction. Now, in '92, Doug told Rhonda Kelly had lied for the police, saying, "She did not identify me. I know she didn't."
I know, Rhonda, that she did not identify me. I know she did. I never seen her. But I know that the police had her get up and say, we know this is, blah, blah, blah. If you can just identify this, it's the only way we can link this guy. Because she was really the only one that could put me there,
Kelly has never heard this wire recording. When we spoke, I told her what Doug had said and asked if there was any truth to it.
The cops didn't coach me on anything.
Kelly had seen Doug obscuring the license plate on the getaway car.
Because he was behind the car, crouched down.
Judge for yourself which of these two people you believe.
Well, that's and I think it's the same thing as Sharon Guest. For one thing, I don't think she was ever found.
It seemed there was little Doug detested more than a woman who contradicted him. He told Rhonda Sharon Guest had also lied for the police, saying, "I did hit up on Sharon where she worked, but I don't think she was ever followed by anybody."
You know, I did hit up on Sharon at where she worked, where she was away from it, but I don't think she was ever followed by anybody.
Doug's writ appealing his sentence also attacked other bits of evidence, like the Blue Arrow brand shirt Joyce said he had given her after the rape. Doug wanted Rhonda to tell a judge he had never owned any shirts like that.
But anyway, the shirt that you'll testify to, as soon as you see it, my lawyer will ask you, have you?
It seemed like a lot for Rhonda to keep straight. Doug had anticipated this. He told her his buddy, William Babel, drafted a statement on her behalf.
So, I'll send you the statement. You won't have to fill out a statement. I know that'll save you some work. This guy already filled everything out. All I'm going to do is get it signed and fill it.
Rhonda told Doug she hated going to court for him. Stories in the newspaper always led to people asking her uncomfortable questions.
I just heard people saying, they have new evidence, what's going on, and I'm like, I don't know.
They say they have.
Doug did show some sympathy here.
I do know you're going through a lot of stuff. I do. Every day, 5 days a week. I imagine the phone rings a lot.
Doug said when he got out, he wanted to take Rhonda and the kids and move, maybe to Canada. He intended to go straight and invest in an ostrich farm. He apologized none of the money from his mom's life insurance had materialized the way he had promised. But while Doug daydreamed of the pine-dappled mountain slopes and picturesque Pacific coast of British Columbia, Rhonda worried about more immediate concerns. She told him she feared being arrested.
Well, I think if they ever talk to you again, or me, they're going to have a warrant. And it's going to be yours. Mine's going to be capital homicide, which is conspiracy to commit. The reason they would arrest you or me, because they're certain in their minds that we had something to do with you. They don't know whether I did it or I had somebody do it, but they're certain. The weakest link that they can find is you.
Doug promised Rhonda the police didn't have anything. No body, no evidence, no witness.
Rhonda, I don't see how they can have anybody that can have anybody. I am the only.
I know that's tough to make out, but what Doug said is, quote, "I am the only one that knows where she's at."
I told you that I would never tell anybody, remember, no matter what, and I haven't. I've never told anybody.
As if to prove this point, Doug mentioned the anonymous caller who had phoned police in 1987 claiming to have found a woman's body in the mountains east of Ogden.
Years and years. The way they projected this was, we think we know where the body of Joyce Yost remains are. I know that's only one. You don't.
The conversation had veered into dangerous territory for Doug. Rhonda pushed him, asking if he had ever revisited the site. Doug said yes, to better conceal the body and to retrieve Joyce's watch. The watch he had tried to pawn in Salt Lake City. "You were with me," he said. It's not clear to me now, listening to this muffled audio, if Doug meant "you were with me at the pawn shop" or "you were with me when I revisited the body." Either interpretation could be valid. Rhonda questioned if Doug still worried, the way he used to, each deer hunting season, that someone might stumble across Joyce's remains. Doug said no, because she was high in the mountains and 7 years of leaves would keep her covered. The only time he had worried was when that anonymous caller had claimed to have found a body. Doug ran through a list of people who might have given information to police. Roy D.J. Drody, he said, was a snake. Billy Jack, perhaps, because he had known about the stolen guns. But Doug said Billy Jack didn't actually know he had killed Joyce. Neither did Tom Peters, for that matter. Rhonda was the only one who knew. The only one who could get him convicted and executed. Visiting time was coming to an end. As Rhonda prepared to leave, Doug started questioning when she would be back with the kids. He suggested they come down the very next weekend. They began to argue.
It's gotta be Doug's plan. You are like that. You are. You might have changed.
Rhonda complained he was being pushy, controlling, and manipulative.
You manipulate, Lovell.
I do.
That's probably the worst, being a manipulator. Even trying to be in control, that's fine. I think I'm that way too. She doesn't want their own way.
I can't be in control.
But you don't. No, you don't.
You can't be in control unless you manipulate. Finally, Rhonda stood to leave. Doug told her he worried about her. If worse came to worse, he said, the police might arrest her. If they did, the detectives would claim to have all the evidence in the world. But Doug promised there was no way they could have anything after such a long time. He was wrong. Rhonda was carrying that evidence out of the prison with her on a tiny little Nagra tape deck. The platen on Doug Lovell's typewriter spun, bringing a clean sheet of white paper into place. He put his fingers to the keys, then began pecking out a message to his ex-wife.
Rhonda, this is the hardest letter that I think I've ever had to write.
It was Sunday, May 10th, 1992.
I have tried in every way I know how to be nice and a friend to you, and at the same time be the best father I can be to Alicia and Cody, considering where I'm at.
Doug had reached his breaking point. The typewriter clattered as he rattled off a list of grievances.
I asked you to sign and send back some papers to me that you knew were very important to my case. You said you sent them, and yet I never received them. So I sent you another copy, and guess what? I never received that one either. I wonder why.
Procedural blunders weren't his real reason for writing. The intent, it soon became apparent, was more personal. He accused Rhonda of cheating on him.
I accepted that and went on with my life, but that doesn't seem to be enough for you. You want to continue to make it hard. Why?
A rather brazen point of contention coming from a man convicted of sexually assaulting a woman while he and Rhonda were still married. He had other gripes.
I have written or sent a card to the kids every week for 2.5 years now, missing only 2. I have sent money, Christmas, and birthday presents to the kids. I've tried in vain to call and arrange visits with them, only to be disappointed time after time. The kids don't write me. According to you, they don't want to come down and see me. Our conversations on the phone are so distant, I hardly even know them.
Doug couldn't comprehend why.
But I have no chance of having any kind of relationship with them as long as you remain to be the type of person you are. For the life of me, Rhonda, I'll never understand why you act the way you do. I have done nothing to deserve the way I have been treated by you, nor has my family.
Doug had spent the better part of the prior year worried his ex-wife would crack. He knew she was the strongest possible witness against him if police made good on their threat to charge him with the murder of Joyce Yost. Yet Doug had also become frustrated with Rhonda. So, he said, they were done. No more visits, no more phone calls.
This has been damned hard for me to write, Rhonda, but I won't and can't let you roller coaster my life anymore by using our children.
The roller coaster car that was Doug's life was at that moment perched at the very top of a precipitous drop, primed for the fall. If you or someone you know has endured rape, sexual assault, or sexual abuse of any kind, help is available. In the United States, you can call 1-800-656-HOPE or visit RAINN.org to connect with free resources through the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. No one needs suffer in silence. You are not alone. If you haven't already, please subscribe to or follow Cold to make sure you get every episode. You can also interact with me and the Cold team on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Cold Podcast. Cold is researched and written by Dave Cawley, with editorial oversight by executive producer Cheryl Worsley. Additional executive producers include Paul Anderson, Nick Piniella, and Andrew Greenwood. Audio production by Nina Ernest. Mixing by Trent Sell. Michael Bonmiller composed the main score. Special thanks to the team at Amazon Music. Full credits for each episode are available at thecoldpodcast.com. Cold is an Amazon original by KSL Podcasts in association with Workhouse Media. Thank you for listening.